He later, having no choice, went to a monastery and an Augustinian canon and remained there about 7 years. So he had Augustinian training as a monk. He was known as an Augustinian canon. He was ordained to the priesthood in April 1492. So that's a date that we ought to know, 1492. He then accepted a post as Latin secretary to Henry of Bergen, the Bishop of Cambrai. He was sent by this bishop to the University of Paris to study theology in 1495. In 1499, now those things that are important, I'll say, y'all write these down. Don't worry about getting all of this. But in 1499, William Blount, Lord Montjoy, invited Erasmus to England. There he met Thomas More, who became a friend for life. John Colet quickened Erasmus' ambition to be a primitive theologian. He wanted him to study to be like Origen, who used allegorical methods and who spiritualized the scriptures. Origen did that. And they were trying to train him in that particular format. He returned to the continent with a Latin copy of St. Paul's epistles. Now, Erasmus loved the Latin more than he did the Greek. Erasmus loved the Latin more than he did the Greek. In fact, when he produced his Greek New Testament, it was a sort of come-along thing. He was actually wanting to produce a Latin translation, and it's a compilotician polyglot. That means that there's two languages on one page. We'll go back over that, don't worry about it. When he returned to the continent, he had a copy of St. Paul's epistles and the conviction that ancient theology required a mastery of the Greek language. On a visit to France, he met the fiery preacher Jean Bonnet, who through a Franciscan monk told him that monasticism was a life for factitious men rather than religious men. Bonnet's disciples were fanatical men who faced death really without any fear or tremor. And Erasmus was lent by Voricius, he was lent a copy of the works of Origen. Again, remember who Origen is. Who promoted the allegorical, spiritualizing mode of scriptural interpretation, which had roots in Platonic philosophy. In other words, the early training in Erasmus' life, he was being taught to spiritualize the Bible, not take it literally, to spiritualize it and make allegories out of passages like Luke 16 on the subject of hell. So I want you to get a good feel. I want you to understand who we're talking about and the pronunciation that he developed. Listen to this. By 1502, Erasmus had settled in the university town of Louvain, now in Belgium, and was reading Origen and St. Paul in Greek. So he's a real dedicated student of Origen. That shows up in his translation, by the way. The book that made him famous was the adage or Dutch ear, a collection of Greek and Latin sages. Erasmus, it could be said, believed that, and here's the quote, one was what one read. One was what one read. That's important. You ought to take that down. Erasmus believed that one was what one read. Now we're going to get into some things that if you want to check me out, you're more than welcome to. But take my word for it. I've done my homework. And the things I'm about to tell you about Erasmus, you ought to fix in your mind and think about not only his Greek text, but the way he pronounces the Greek language also. Now notice, he had a long stay in England from 1509 to 1514, where he lectured at the Cambridge University and worked on scholarly projects, including the Greek text of the New Testament. He did that in England. Having returned to the continent, Erasmus made connections with the printing firm of Johanna Froben, or John Froben. You ought to know that name. He made connections with the printing firm of Johann Froben. And he traded with Froben to prepare a new edition of the Adagra in 1515. In other words, he was setting up a friendship with John Froben, which he did have for life. And Froben helped him in the printing of his Latin and Greek manuscripts. He produced his annotated text of the Greek New Testament and his edition of St. Jerome's opera. Both came from the press in 1516. Now again, it's not important for you to remember all these things, just some things that I point out to you. He produced paraphrases of the books of the New Testament, each one dedicated to a monarch or a prince of the church. Revision of his Greek New Testament, listen to this please, you ought to remember this, nothing else. Revision of his Greek New Testament began almost as soon as the first edition appeared. He made mistakes as a textual critic. Now here he is. He's produced a Greek text from 12th century manuscripts. And as soon as he had the thing published, he realized that it was full of textual and transcriptional errors. So he begins to make additions. Now I'm going to put that right here and come back to it in a little while. But that ought to say something to you about the Greek text that he produced. The first Greek text that he produced, because he was in a hurry to get it published and printed, he rushed it to the printers ahead of another man that I'll tell you about. And by so doing, didn't take his time to do his correct editing, and when it was printed, he had to do an immediate addition because it was full of errors, transcriptional errors, typos, you name it. It was full of error. He was a bad textual critic. In 1519, his second edition appeared, which replaced the Vulgate with his own Latin translation. Erasmus' clerical foes blamed him for sparking and inspiring Martin Luther's challenge to papal authority. Let me say that again. Erasmus' clerical foes blamed him for sparking and inspiring Martin Luther, who was the great reformer, to challenge papal authority. He was afraid to do it himself, however. Erasmus finally began to write against Luther because of Luther's belief in election, predestination, foreknowledge, and the epistles of Paul. Erasmus made 5 editions of his Greek New Testament. He made 5 editions. Now let me just park here for a second. You're in college to learn. Sometimes I'll give you both sides and let you decide. But there are times when I have to be dogmatic because of the facts. Now there's a popular theory that goes around that says that God preserved his word through Erasmus because through Erasmus, Stephanos in 1550 was used to bring about a text also that was used to bring about the King James Version. Now let me take your fears away. I've been preaching Christ's gospel and teaching the Word of God for 47 years. I've preached thousands of times. I'm not blowing my horn. I just want to make a point here. Never once from any pulpit, jail cells that I've preached at, brush harbors, Bible colleges, prayer meetings, over 47 years, seminaries, radio programs that I've done. Never once have I ever used anything but a King James Version. So nobody could accuse me of not loving and using the King James Version of the Bible. Our college has that as a standard, by the way. And I love the King James Version, but it's not the only version. And in my opinion, take it for what it's worth, it's not the best version. And there's some reasons that I'll provide for you. If a man has to make an addition, if I write a book, anybody in here has written a book? Okay. If I write a book and it comes out and I later learn that some of my information in that book is incorrect, it behooves me, it's incumbent upon me to make a revision, an addition, to correct that. So 5 editions ought to tell us that all of those editions, evidently God did not preserve entirely perfect from those manuscripts the Word of God. Now, do I believe that we have the Word of God? Absolutely. But it's contained in more than just one particular translation. 5 editions to correct the errors that he had made when he produced the Greek manuscripts. Now, like I said, if you don't believe what I'm saying, get on Wikipedia or computer, anything you want to, look it up. But I have no reason not to tell you the truth. I'm trying to give you an education.
These were grammatical errors?
They were transcriptional errors. They were textual errors. They were grammatical errors. They were typos. All of those 4 or 5 major things that he had done because he was trying to beat another man, another Catholic, to get his version published first. I'll talk to you about it in just a moment. In 1529, when Protestant Basil banned Catholic worship altogether, Erasmus and some of his humanist friends moved to the Catholic town, university town of Freiburg in Burgosal. He refused an invitation. Listen to this. He refused an invitation to the Diet of Augsburg, where Philip Melanchthon in his Augsburg Confession was to institute and initiate the first meaningful discussion between the Protestants, the Lutherans, and the Catholic theologians. I think he was afraid to go there because he knew he couldn't back up what he believed. That's a personal opinion. Erasmus used humanist techniques. Please know this. Erasmus used humanist techniques for writing his texts as he prepared his Greek editions of the New Testament. He used humanist techniques when he was writing his Greek New Testament. Listen to this. Erasmus rejected the doctrine of faith alone and continued to recognize the authority and continued to recognize the authority of the Pope. So he was a Catholic that wanted to stay in the middle of the road. He didn't want to go with the Reformation because he didn't believe in faith alone, salvation by faith alone. Are you getting this? The man who provided the Greek text, that the English translation, the King James Version, the beloved King James Version that I love and you love, was produced from, did not believe that salvation was by grace alone. That ought to explain some of the verses that you read. He rejected election, predestination, foreknowledge. He did not believe that a person could be saved by grace through faith alone because he was a Catholic. Okay, here we go. In 1502, you ought to know this, Cardinal Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros, we'll just call him Jimenez, put together a team of Spanish translators to create a completion of a Bible in 4 languages. Now, here's the man he's up against. And he's doing his best, Erasmus is, to get his Greek text published first. He wants to go down in history as having the first Greek text. A completion is a polyglot. You can have 2 or 3 or 4. This particular side might be in Latin. This might be in German. This might be in Dutch. This might be in Greek. It's called a polyglot because the Bible that they had, that they translated, had several different languages right down the line in it. It's called a completion polyglot. That's just an example, by the way. I don't remember all the different languages that was there, but I'm trying to teach you what a polyglot is. Completion polyglot. That's a mouthful, isn't it? All right? Now look at this. This happened in 1502. The team completed and printed the full New Testament, including the Greek translation, in 1514. It was printed, but not published. This Cisneros Jimenez, some people would call him Zymes, but it's a Spanish name. It's Jimenez. Jimenez de Cisneros. That's who he was running against. So here's what the man did. Erasmus went to the Pope and begged for a publication privilege of 4 years. During the 4 years, the Greek New Testament that he had prepared went to the printers and was published first, because the Pope put a block on Jimenez and his team that had produced this polyglot with the Greek in it. Erasmus wanted to be first, so he begged the Pope for a publication halt on any and every text other than his own. He was granted that. And in 1516, Erasmus published his Greek New Testament. But listen carefully. He was forced by the Spanish team to wait until 1520 to publish their Complutensian polyglot. It was finally released in 1522, so he beat them. The fear that Erasmus had of somebody publishing a Greek New Testament before him caused him to rush his first edition to the printing press. And he had to forego editing and having someone else check his wording, his text, the textual criticism, the transcription, and all of that which is involved in preparing a Greek manuscript. The result was a large number of translating mistakes, transcriptional errors, typos that required further edition. His work was rushed into printing rather than editing, resulting in a number of transcriptional errors. Published in 1516, it became the first published, not the first printed, but the first published Greek New Testament by his friend, John Froben. Now it's fixing to get interesting, so hold on. Erasmus used several Greek manuscripts, but he did not have access to one single complete manuscript. That's worthy of you writing down or taking note of. Erasmus used several different manuscripts from the Byzantine family to make his Greek New Testament. But he did not have access to one manuscript that was complete and full. All of these manuscripts that he used were from the 12th century on. The Byzantine textual family is what he used, and he used the oldest manuscript the least, because he was afraid of its supposedly erratic text. In other words, he rejected the oldest manuscripts and preferred rather the Byzantine 12th century manuscripts. Now, here's something that's important. And in just a few moments, we'll take a break. I'd like to get through Erasmus before we do. Look at this, please. In languages, there is what we call families. I don't know if that's F-A-M-I-L, families. There is branches. There is dialects. Now, just because, listen carefully, just because you have an abundance of witnesses or manuscripts if they are from the same family, then the errors that are in them, and I know that's treason in some circles, but it's the truth. The errors will continue to be copied, manuscript after manuscript after manuscript. Same with branches, same with dialects. Sometimes the oldest manuscript may not be the best if it's from a family or a branch that is known to have textual errors in it. So, you got to remember the manuscripts are weighed, W-E-I-G-H-E-D. That means the words are counted in a critical textual criticism, and I know some wouldn't have that, but that's what's happened whether they like it or not. They're weighed to see how weighty they are, because look at this. According to scholarship, a scribe is more likely to add a word or words than he is to leave off words. Would you agree with that? Because as he writes, many times he'll see a scribal interpolation, meaning a scribe before him has made a note that he thinks this is the proper rendering, this is the proper word, and he'll add that word to the text. Now, if you think I'm kidding, do a little research. And so, just because you have 500 witnesses, say to the Gospel of Matthew, if they're all from the same family that we know have textual variants and textual errors in it, does not mean that that's more weighty than one manuscript that's recognized by scholarship that has fewer or less textual errors and scribal interpolations and variants in that manuscript. I will let that sink in a minute. It doesn't mean just because there are more witnesses to any book of the New Testament that they're the right ones. Now, let me say this before we go any further. I don't want to lose you. I want you to stay and believe in what I'm telling you, because it's the truth. I invite you to do the research yourself, but listen to me for just a moment. Doctrinally, I don't care what manuscript you have. There isn't that much difference doctrinally in the manuscripts. So that we can assuredly say that we have the Word of God. Why is it then that in the last, say, 100 years at least, that there have been other translations to come out on the market and that are produced by scholars and are used by scholars and are used by men of God throughout this world as a better rendering than our beloved King James Version? Well, there are many reasons. One is because since Erasmus made his Greek New Testament, there have been